Welcome to Happy Times and Places. This is a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, talk about a Doctor Who story chosen by a friend of mine, and during each instalment I drop facts and observations and try to guess what my guest's favourite thing might be about the episode.
Hello, I'm Tom Curley, or Daren Thomas, or Daren Thomas Curley, depending on where you know me from. I know, confusing, isn't it? I'm English-born Irishman. I am also a neurodivergent writer with autism and ADHD. So the reason I mention that is that I might take a while to get to what I'm trying to say, and I probably will go off at tangents, but I'll endeavour to do my best, promise. Anyway, thank you, Toby, for allowing me to suggest something which isn't just any old story for me, a Doctor Who story. This has stayed with me over the years. It's probably my favourite Doctor Who story of all time.
Well, hello. It's The Deadly Assassin, Part 2. I had a lovely time watching Part 1 in the previous episode, not that long ago as I record this. I watched it last night, and now it's this morning. I've got a cup of tea. There's a song in my heart, because I love watching good and exciting Doctor Who, and I do love this period of the show, where I think everything comes together in terms of writing quality, acting quality, production quality, and just the whole sort of rigorousness with which the show is put together with a view to making as strong and intelligent and thrilling a series as possible. And that's my bread and butter Doctor Who, although I do consider Doctor Who to be at its best, or to be worth the most when it is reflecting society or it has something to say. But actually, the Hinchcliffe and Holmes era, I mean, yes, he satirises bureaucracy, doesn't he? And he pricks pomposity, which is definitely worth doing all over the place, and Robert Holmes is excellent at that. But I would say Holmes and Hinchcliffe are less politically engaged than Terence Dicks and Barry Letts. So that goes against my instincts about what when the show is operating on all cylinders. But I think that's perhaps maybe a reaction against today, where a lot of television, a lot of our cultural output thinks that having a political view is enough. And that happens in comedy as well, where it's enough to sort of say, I hold this view that is a worthwhile one, and that gives me a free pass to not actually do anything particularly interesting with it. I'd rather something said nothing and was superbly made and witty and entertaining and well characterized than something said something I wholeheartedly agree with, but did it in a sort of tedious and unengaging and not very intelligent way. And the Hinchcliffe and Holmes era is extremely intelligent, and I don't think Robert Holmes was your traditional sort of intellectual. I don't think he was university educated, but he's clearly well read, in his use of language and the economy of his dialogue is I just think a remarkable thing in a tea time, disposable bit of tea time, child-friendly frippery. Anyway, I could be saying all this during the episode. I'm joined by Daren Thomas, no mean script man himself. Did a lot of episodes of Holby City. Always an interesting and engaging fellow. One of those people that I think I see often and actually don't, but I'm in touch with because of the miracles of social media that make us think we're we're in the vicinity of people we actually haven't sort of touched or held eye contact with for close to a decade. That's not the case with Daren. I have seen him more recently than that, but or actually maybe I haven't. Yikes. Anyway, this is The Deadly Assassin, which as I speak is 48 years old. So this was first seen 48 years ago. And I am going to press play in 3, 2, 1. Well, it's playing, but a little peek behind the curtain before we start. In between me saying the word one and pressing play, I've had to fiddle with iPlayer. It was playing really slowly, not really slowly, but there was just a slight lag, and I could tell as soon as the theme tune kicked in, and it was just a bit slow. So I suspect it would have gone out of sync, and then I tried other Doctor Who's, and it was still doing that. So then I came out and went on to what was on now, and then came back, and Doctor Who was still there. I've turned the computer on and off in the end. Anyway, just goes to show that the slick product that you hear that arrives in your ears is as the result sometimes of tedious background machinations that involve a lot of time and bother. Anyway, this is one of those rare things where the cliffhanger is augmented by something we didn't see last time. The recap contains information we didn't have before. Now, I think this is acceptable in a way that sort of Perils of Pauline stuff isn't, where you'd see a car go off the side of a cliff and go, oh, God, they were all dead. And then the following week, you'd see them in the car, jump out, stand up, dust themselves down, have a picnic, walk to Weston-super-Mare, and then the car would go off the cliff. Here, we just have the insertion of the gun that actually kills the president. But that's fine, because, we know deep down that the Doctor didn't do it. And I would rather not waste time with us worrying about the Doctor, because now what we've got to do is worry about who's going to believe the Doctor, because as far as everybody is concerned, and we can see why, because we were taken along with that too, why how the Doctor is now going to get out of this situation that has obviously been contrived to ensnare him. Angus Mackay as well. I had a little bit of a delve into Angus Mackay's diaries, who plays Barusa. Look, I love the fact the Doctor's in his sort of long johns, and I don't know, that's and we've recently seen the Doctor in his pants, but I like the long johns, and again it speaks to that sort of timelessness, because I don't think people really wore long johns in 1977. Maybe they did, but I associate it with older worldier. But again, they could equally fit in a futuristic spaceship and not look out of place. I could just say the same thing over and over again. I can see the seal of Rassilon. My friend Andrew O'Neill, who's a comic, has the seal of Rassilon as a tattoo. And I recently met Bronte Schultz, who's an expert on Nigel Neal, and she has the they call it a pentacle in Quatermass of the Pit, but I don't think it actually is. It's not the triangular thing. It's the series of circles. But she's got that on her arm. So the two tattoos I might have claimed I'm a tattoo-free gentleman have been adorned on themselves by others. I love that lovely the fact that they take the time to do an establishing shot that is the camera far away, which just shows that the Doctor is in this strange sort of high sort of prison surrounded by nothing. Is again great bit of scene setting. Baker is brilliantly intense. Again, Derek Seaton is great. He's playing this sort of idiotic thug, but it's very clever. It's not cast as the sort of dozy grunt. And Derek Seaton, I checked. Derek Seaton died in 1979. I knew it wasn't far after. It was 3 years later, but he was only 35. Collapsed and died outside TV Centre whilst rehearsing a play. Married to Paula Wilcox from Man About the House, who is still around and still acting. She's done Corrie recently. He was born the same year as my mum, Derek Seaton, so he would have been 80 this year. So a long life ahead of him, had not, a quirk of health interrupted. I love the Doctor's exchange with Castellan Spandrel, and I love that the personal grudge and the fire from Baker. I never met him, and then Spandrel meets him with that. I know, these are two pragmatic intellectuals who get the gravity of the situation, but they're not panicking, but they're underlining just how important it is. And then you got a joke: vaporization without representation is against the Constitution, which is of course a misquote about taxation without representation. It's so chock full, and again, it has to be played absolutely believably. So the jokes, if you like, are there just to lift it, to make it sort of slightly non-naturalistic, but without the performance or the production tipping a wink to that, which makes it otherworldly and interesting and fascinating. And I love Castellan Spandrel is a favourite character of mine. Even well, we'll get to that. Again, we have the premonition thing here, which again I find often a bit hokey in some drama, but there's a reason for it, and that's what facilitates the Matrix in later in this episode. Precognitive vision is impossible. He knows, and he knows that we know. So it's saying, some of these sort of dramatic things are unbelievable. The only thing I don't quite buy from this is the repeat of this joke framed an Earth expression. But if he's just been showing that to Engin will have seen the Doctor say that. I suppose you go, no, he's only shown him the last bit, but anyway, it doesn't matter. I love these two. So Eric Chitty was dead within a year. Eric Chitty, this was shown in October. Eric Chitty died. In fact, his last television appearance is the following October, and that's something that's broadcast posthumously. But this is one of his last roles. I think he's a delightful actor. He's, of course, like actually Michael Bilton, who was the Time Lord last week. What fella? Eric Chitty was in The Massacre. So The Massacre and The Deadly Assassin share a couple of cast members. But Eric Chitty, best known probably for the sitcom Please Sir, but he's in Dr. Zhivago, and he's a wonderful sort of genial actor. And then Angus Mackay. Here we are. I was reading his diary. He always plays these austere, slightly waspish, slightly cutting, slightly superior sort of authority figures, and you just imagine he was probably great company and very funny. He was Kenneth Branagh's landlord when Kenneth Branagh was at RADA, and I think they had a great friendship. And reading about Branagh when before he's famous, when Mackay is his landlord, Kenneth Branagh comes across very well as a polite and engaging young man. But, one always imagines watching these actors what an amazing life it must be, being an actor, appearing in classic television, playing wonderful parts. And then you read their diaries and they're sad and unfulfilled, and there's nothing about the Deadly Assassin in his diary, partially because when it's on, he's having to sell his cottage because he's got an income tax bill, and he's looking after his wife, the actress Dorothy Reynolds, who is stricken with, I think, motor neurone disease. And long married, but also I think a man conflicted about his personal life, shall we say. I love just this little touch of the Doctor doing the caricatures again with pen and ink and on paper. This story is full of beautiful, beautiful actors of the Angus Mackay type, technically sound, giving character to the. And I like this. I mean, it's obviously slightly limited in what you could do in terms of size. You'd probably want a grander courtroom set than this, really, if money was no object. But it's very clever and subtle the way that Chancellor Goth manipulates the Time Lord there. The what is just a little casual, and he goes, "Oh, you hard of hearing." And again, this is humanizing the Time Lords in a way, in that, yes, even if they're humanoid, even if they are all powerful godlike figures, they will have trouble with their hip. Although, the faceless lift line of Runcible last week, I can sort of understand why people might feel that is undermining the mythology of regeneration. Again, we might be able to come on to that. I think this is lovely. I love this. This feels quite grown up. The application is frivolous. That's brilliant dialogue. Guarantee of liberty. I love the Doctor's righteousness. I love and it says it's just the addition of, it says in part. It's legalese spoken fluently by an actor that is good at all of this sort of formal stuff that were kind of understood and trained in and just had. And I love that exchange. He's abusing a legal technicality. No, sir, I am claiming a legal right. That just feels so grown up and clever and plausible and feasible. And that this society that has been set up of one of that has sort of tradition and laws and things, written into constitutions that you can do that sort of thing, and I love Spandrel and the Doctor. Suppose I can convince you. It feels like there's whenever the Doctor's everything's against the Doctor, you feel that there's just this reasonable man, this dogged, slightly cynical copper, basically, who's got an open mind. Now, but I know that the casting of George Pravda could be difficult for some, because I look at, I love all this, the darkness in here, and it is a great this sort of zombie. The Master as zombie is a wonderful image, and Peter Pratt has this slightly tremulous sort of voice where you they've obviously said, well, only hate keeps me alive. He is a real force of darkness, which the Master always was, but he was the suave villain that you love to hate. This is an equally valid way of presenting an archenemy of the Doctor. They are two sides of the same coin, and this is the extreme. You can't have the extreme side of a coin, but you know what I mean. This is the extreme manifestation of the Master's evil to the Doctor's good. He's he's not exchanging quips or bon mots or charming his way. He's desperate to cling on to life and will kill anyone to do it, and if he can murder and humiliate the Doctor while he does, then he will. It's a legitimate way of doing the Master, but as I say, I can understand. I love this. The Miles with that sort of very identifiable dialogue, and these two guys sort of methodically working out how the Doctor is innocent. And Spandrel I love, and what a name! I love the name, Castellan Spandrel. But Pravda is an interesting actor. He's terrible in The Mutants, and I've seen him be not great in some things, but I've also seen him be excellent in other things. He's lovely in The Enemy of the World, and he worked a lot and is very good. And I like the fact that David Maloney has gone, well, this is a guy, and I think he was a dissident, wasn't he? He'd basically sought asylum in the UK, and his wife Hannah Maria Pravda is in Survivors, and again another example of the British sort of entertainment fraternity enabling people from other shores who may have had no choice but to come here, to give them a life and a career. And we benefit from these actors, especially if we want authentic foreign voices. But then you go, but what about if we're casting them in, Spandrel would look at that shot, look at the height of that set and the cleverness, and again, just a quick establishing shot to give a sense of height and scale. Oh, and a quick mention to this wonderful, ominous, but formal organ music of Dudley Simpson that gives us a real sense of time and place and importance. But yeah, Pravda, you would have in this part you could have expected any number of sort of world weary, cynical RP English character actors, or even if you wanted to mix it up a bit and do a sort of shorthand for cussed and salty, you'd cast a northerner and get them to do their actual accent, which even that would have been quite bold for 1970s sci-fi, where where northern voices, even northern voices in a lot of British drama at this point, even when done by genuine northerners, seem to have been sort of put upon a base of RP, and then the northern is put on top of it. It's because RP is seen as the way that people speak properly when they're acting. I love this way that they work out the mystery. And look, stasers don't do the reason it's very difficult to see is because stasers do damage to body tissue. So he misses, of course he does, because the sights have been doctored, but what he hits, it doesn't make much of an impact. So you'd have to be looking for the damage that's been done. I think it's so cleverly worked out. People don't faint anymore, do they, at shocking things? But if anyone's going to faint, it would be Runcible. I think he's a lovely character as well. he's annoying and he's an idiot, but you really like him because Hugh Walters is so good at being likable whilst being a bit of a prat. And Hugh Walters, William Shakespeare in The Chase, and of course Vogel in Revelation of the Doctors. I think he's a beautiful actor. I never had the pleasure, sadly, because he was one of those people you thought would always be around. Now, that's an action man, and it's a shame because obviously the best master shrinking special effect is the one that took them 100, took them like 3 weeks, a whole day in the studio in Terror of the Autons to have a sight of Gucci in the lunchbox, and they obviously didn't have time to do that. And you go, well, we've got action men. I think maybe he's my sworn arch enemy, a fiend who glories in chaos and destruction. Not one of Robert Holmes's best lines, but yet I still rather like it because it fits within some of the better dialogue that perhaps doesn't sound quite so hokey, but I quite like the hokiness, and I like the fact that the final challenge and old scores to settle. This feels like it's an epic kind of adventure. This is setting its stores going. This isn't just your run of the mill Doctor Who. This is an important juncture in the history of the show. But yes, the action men, because they have curled hands in order to help them hold guns, they are a little bit of a trademark, and I wonder if you wouldn't have done something to those or hidden them to hide the fact that they're action men. And I like this. I like that Spandrel's first thought is, look, whatever you're doing, get out of my, don't do it in my town. I like the fact that the characters aren't just there addressing dialogue and plot. They're saying things that you would say if this was happening in Scotland Yard or in a city or something like that. But the dialogue is still gives us this sense of this other place. Now I remember reading this in the book and being very pleased that Runcible had survived when he fainted and thought he might die then. And then you have that false sort of moment of flea bitings. That's from if it's not from the Duchess of Malfi, it's from one of those. But it's a beautiful, just a little piece of way of saying this is nothing. But it's great. It's great. It's great wording. But yeah, and in the book, I'd imagine Runcible to have a sort of horrible little knife sticking out of his back, like that whacking great thing that would have shattered his spine, and is slightly comical. But excitonic circuitry. But it's also pretty grim because Runcible is a sort of comedy character, and isn't it sweet that his final words are to sort of apologise. Tom Baker is so good; he's almost up to my standards. This Doctor is not perfect. He is pompous and he is waspish and he is bolshy and he doesn't listen, but then he kind of has to slow down and listen and accept what he's being told. But that to me reminds me a bit of this is what I think Stephen Moffat does very well with the Doctor, of this mind whirring so quickly that the Doctor gets away with themselves and has to sometimes stop and wait for other people to catch up and get over himself a little bit. It speaks of great intelligence, but some of the downsides that come with that. So here we are, brilliant. We've got this repository of knowledge. That is the thing that foresees the death of the president, but it is rerouted and played into the Doctor's TARDIS in order to lure the Doctor. Now, all of that is sort of science fiction nonsense, but it is well thought out, it is well wrought, and it feeds into how the plot works. It is really meticulously and brilliantly conceived and done. It's very clever science fiction, and it's really effective thriller. And Tom Baker, I think, is just pitch perfect. And again, I love the fact that he feels like the Doctor, but he's just wearing the Doctor's trousers and shirt. He's divested himself of the rest of the Doctor's costume. Just makes it feel real. That you are. He is the Doctor in the long scarf and the coat, and he's still got the long scarf and the coat on, except he hasn't. He's taken them off because he's charging about, and he's rolling up his shirt sleeves, but they're billowy shirt sleeves with a period costume collar and ribbon up front. It's a very Shakespearean, and so it beautifully kind of fits within the sort of design concept of the whole story, which I think looks magnificent. It's a terrific piece of design. But yeah, and so now we're going into the Matrix, which is there for a reason, plot wise. But the plot is about to kind of slow down and stop. But I'm not going to object to that, because we're about to see one of the great Doctor Who sequences, which is part 3. But part 2 is a curious beast, isn't it? Because I always forget how good part 2 is, because part 1 is all about the lead up to the assassination. Part 3 is the nightmare sequence that is so brilliantly directed, but doesn't have much plot. 4 is a typical Hinchcliffe Holmes part 4, which means it's probably the least satisfying of them all. But we'll come to that. I wonder if I will get over my reservations about 4, but I always feel the journey is better than the destination in Deadly Assassin, and indeed in a lot of Hinchcliffe Holmes. And part 2 is this sort of curious, because I forget how much of it is actually, one would sort of think of this as being part 3 because it's the Matrix sequence. But before we've got to this point, there's loads of sort of plot and character, and the solving of the mystery and the working out, which is all done really intelligently, but really compellingly too, because the characters are great. There's plenty of incident, and the dynamics between everybody are really exciting. And I mean, just things like the sort of chalky white of these rocks, and the fact that Baker is so physical. He hasn't got elbow pads on here, and there's no mattress for him or anything like that. He's a tough guy, for all the sort of eccentricity. This is quite a sort of, there's a cussed physicality to it, and that's a dummy. But I actually think it looks all right. They've slowed it down slightly, and television and films even at this time were famous for having sort of bad dummies that you would chortle at, that would take you out of it. But actually, I think you have to look quite closely for that to be given away, that's a dummy, because again, there's so much attention to detail that they're not going to just go, well, everything of this kind has a crap dummy, and well, it's just what we do. They go, well, no, this is often something that breaks the reality of what we're trying to do, so let's just try and pay a little bit of extra attention to this to make sure it's not as naff as it usually is. Yeah, it's not perfect, but I think it's a better example of its kind. And this is where we start to see something that's quite unlike anything that's ever really been in Doctor Who before. Into a political thriller, we suddenly find ourselves in a sort of surrealist nightmare. And I don't like dream worlds in a lot of stuff, partially because these days they just seem to be people standing around in either white spaces or talking to very po-faced golden aliens about reaching into your inner thoughts and all that sort of guff, which always tries to be very profound, and I just find very boring. This just goes, no, we can have it as a nightmare and as an adventure. And part 3 we'll talk about next time, and I can understand people who might go, well, there's no plot from now on. But I think Maloney has taken this, and it's not like Planet of Evil, where the film work is amazing, and then you have this very sort of sparse studio, and the design is hugely compromised, and the drama is sort of diluted a bit. Even though I do like Planet of Evil more than a lot of people seem to these days. But the studio work is so good. But then we go onto location, and the story goes up a notch. So there we go. That's part 2. I don't think that's the greatest cliffhanger. There's so many wonderful bits in this nightmare world of the Matrix. I don't think the train is the best, but that's okay. That's okay. It's there's so much to this. Even the font of the title sequence has that slight sort of calligraphy element to it. It's just it's just the edges of the capital letters that just have that slight swirl. It's terrific. It's terrific. There's so much about that I love. What do I love? I love the face-off between... I love the whole relationship between the Doctor and Spandrel, where even though, and again, I'm sure I'll talk more about George Pravda, even though I do think his sort of thick accent does get in the way of probably what the author intended, of again having this sort of cynical and but I mean, he still plays that. Pravda still plays that, but the accent has barriers for us as viewers. But then again, I think that makes the casting laudable, because instead of saying, well, look, we've got this good actor here who will cast as Russian dissidents or Russian diplomats, so they're saying, well, look, on this planet, why does the planet Gallifrey can have different continents where people, like they do in real worlds, have different accents, and maybe Castellan Spandrel is from a part of Gallifrey where a different kind of language, way of speaking, as happens in real life, has evolved, and now he lives on the capital and sounds different to everybody because he has that different background. Doesn't need to explain that or anything. If people on Earth, there's a myriad of different accents, even in the UK. But again, I suppose it sticks out a little bit in the 70s because there weren't even. I mean, you didn't hear many sort of Geordie accents or Scouse accents or anything on television until, well, I know there were exceptions, like when the boat comes in and things like that, but I think this first time I heard a Scouse accent properly registered with me. Now, this is of course partially because of my age as well. I wasn't cognizant of most telly in the 70s, but was when Brookside came on. That was the first time there was, and I lived in the countryside in the middle of nowhere, and so and there wasn't, and often accents were a sort of rather patronising shorthand. Thick people or criminals could have a regional accent, but most people talked proper, and so foreign actors from abroad would get cast as their own nationality, and the parts that were their own nationality tended to be representative of a particular thing, spies, crooks, untrustworthy people, characterization and opportunities were probably limited. Now there are going to be exceptions, of course, but what I like about what Maloney has done here is gone, well, why don't I just cast him as this copper? Why not? Why can't he be? And as I say, I can understand people for whom that works against the brilliant dialogue that he has and the great character that he is. I love Castellan Spandrel. I think he's really well written, but it works for me. I'm fine. I'm fine with it, and I do get that. He does do those, do a sort of warm little chuckle with those cynical asides. But then I love the fact that he's absolutely with the seriousness of the situation. When Baker gives him that, I never met him. I know. It's war. It's real. We're dealing with a serious business here. But he's also got a lovely sort of casual nature about a man with a bit of authority doing his job. And there's a mutual respect thing going on there, I think, which really works. Baker engages with him and clearly loves Eric Chitty, and I love that relationship between the Doctor and Spandrel. I love the way that they sort of work on the mystery together, and that Spandrel, just through experience and intuition and professionalism, gives him the benefit of the doubt. I think the court case is well done within the limitations of the fact that it's just clearly a load of people, and they can only afford one chair, and that sadly doesn't match some of the. I've used this phrase rather too much in this podcast, but the pomp and circumstance elsewhere. If I'm sure if money had been no object, or there'd just been a little more, they'd have made the court seem more sort of austere and formal and full of various sort of procedures to be gone through. As we still have to this day, and judges still wear wigs, and people still, the formalities that are observed, and the way that things are done. But I still nonetheless think they make that scene interesting. I think the bit where he as I say, the Goth sort of manipulates and outwits the slightly doddery Time Lord, the way that the Doctor just sort of broods and does those sketches, which is such a lovely little touch. The fact that Runcible is a little bit sort of bitchy, isn't he? Going, well, I saw him do this. And I talked I love Runcible, but I interrupted myself, and it is worth, because I don't want to forget about it. The Runcible and the facelift thing in part one, I can understand why people might go, you've taken a really important thing that's an essential part of the show's makeup, and something that needs the audience to buy into, and it's a responsibility of the program makers to not undermine the some of the less sort of straightforward, dare I say, believable elements of a program, and say, we have to take regeneration absolutely seriously in order for the audience to accept it and go with it. So to have a comedy character refer to it as a facelift undermines that, and I the only way I rationalise that, especially as if they are supposed to be contemporaries, does that mean that Runcible still has the same face he had when they were at college together? In which case, the Doctor's turned into William Hartnell and then regenerated 3 times, whilst Runcible has stayed as he was. Or is it that the Doctor recognises Runcible, but Runcible used to have a different face, but then Runcible himself would have had a facelift. And he does say facelift, whereas we know the Doctor's had 1, 2, 3. Well, at this point, we think the Doctor's had regenerated twice. Now, that could be because the Doctor lives a rackety life, and so therefore has been put in danger, which means he's regenerated at a quicker rate than most Time Lords would, and that's why Runcible is disdainful of that, and that's definitely there in the performance, that Runcible kind of goes, oh God, this guy's regenerated twice. I shouldn't really be hanging around with him. He's a bit of an oik. But also the way it's written is that Runcible therefore hasn't had one, in which case why is he so young when Hartnell was so old? I mean, I know I'm thinking about it too much, but I'm trying to rationalise it so that it doesn't bother me, and I don't think I entirely successfully can. At the end of the day, I let the show get away with it because I love Hugh Walters. I think Runcible's a funny character. I can sort of see what Robert Holmes is trying to do by pricking the pomposity of what the Time Lords are, but I can equally accept that people might think that's a joke too far and undermines some of the serious credibility that you need to maintain if you're to make a science fiction so believable and to not undermine its drama. Which is all about something that happened in part one. I love Dudley Simpson's organ music. It's really ominous and rumbling, but also fits with the austere surroundings. I think Roger Murray Leach's design. Look at those 2 establishing shots that are far away, giving a sense of scale. That panopticon set is absolutely exceptional. Those costumes have endured for a reason. James Atchison and Joan Ellicott. I think Atchison left the production, didn't he? But I think he's therefore responsible for the sort of Time Lord silhouette. They occasionally cause problems when actors have got the full regalia on for actors who want to turn their heads. I think that's more stark in Arc of Infinity, but that's partially because they're all blocked to be, sitting directly in front of us so that we can see them, because it's very stagey, and then when they need to talk to each other they have to sort of shift their entire bodies to talk to the person sitting next to them. But I don't think it's as much of a problem here because it's better directed, to be honest. And also ceremonial garb is restrictive and is annoying and does sometimes have less of an eye on practicality than it does on aesthetics. So that entirely works for me. I think the solid design concept and the presentation of Gallifrey is absolutely superb. There's so many little bits to choose from the beginning of this nightmarish sequence, but it seems wrong to choose any of those because there's going to be a plethora of them next time. So I sort of think of the Doctor falling off the cliff and the spooky horseful Doctor with his big syringe, and that lovely the light and that horrible sound that's like of whatever it is, that medical piece of equipment that's also a bit like nails on a blackboard. That's a bit like a sort of buzzing mosquito as well. It's really clever use of sound and light as that, as that sunlight turns into the surgical lamp. It's so cleverly done, and the way that it fades between one set piece and another to give it this sort of dreamlike quality. And it makes a point of the Doctor looking down at his foot, then looking up again, and then his foot getting trapped. How did they do that? Was that an existing track, and Tom Baker had to put his track in? Did they lay the track? Oh, I mean, I could look it up, but I don't care. It doesn't matter. It absolutely feels to me like Tom Baker and the Doctor have their foot, stuffed between two really hard bits of metal as a train comes towards him. And I still don't think it's a brilliant or that good a cliffhanger, but just because it pales into it pales in comparison to some of the other images. That gas mask, we know how effective gas masks are in Doctor Who. That beginning of Genesis of the Daleks, that slow motion massacre. Well, here we have it again, and the way that phantom soldier sort of staggers, and the horse. It's just a simple, beautiful piece of imagery from a ghastly time in relatively recent history, but again a kind of timeless sort of portent of doom, and there's something about the fact it's a gas mask and the fact it's a horse that combine to make it really sort of haunting and terrible. And that's nothing, it's just a bit. The Doctor stumbles across the thing, and David Maloney's got a great idea for a horrible image, or I don't know if it's in the script, but it is just something that's a bit, and it's the simplest of ingredients, but to make something giddying and unpleasant and unnerving in a story that's so far been about sort of cloisters and political assassinations. It's beautifully jarring, and yet entirely consistent with the quality and aesthetics of the story. So, the start of this Matrix sequence that's going to take up most of the next episode is already. And as I say, even the chalkiness of those rocks, the colour, the way that it looks, the way I can feel the chalk, I can sort of smell it. And the chinks that it makes as the stones rub together, the rocks rub together as the Doctor's hanging off the side of the mountain. Now, I think probably when I read the book, I was a bit annoyed that the samurai sword cut through the Doctor's scarf, even though it's a phantom scarf, and of course the Doctor isn't wearing a scarf when he goes into the Matrix. But whenever I read in the book that something bad had happened to the scarf, I think it gets cut in half a bit, doesn't it, in Androids of Tara, and then of course Davison unravels it, and that to me would be sacrilege, and I'm still always a bit cross with stories where the Doctor's scarf gets damaged. But yeah, so much in that. I what am I going to choose? I love Spandrel. I love the music. I love the design. I love the thriller element. I love the way the thriller element plays out and the detective work between the Doctor and Spandrel. I love that scene between those two exchanges between the Doctor and Spandrel. The one where he, says, I never met him, and he says, I know I've read your bio, and then the bit later where he says, perhaps if I could convince you, and he goes, all right, convince me. I love that interplay between those two characters. I love the sort of I love the plausibility of the sort of etiquette and rule of law that is painted very intelligently. With Cardinal Barusa telling Chancellor Goth the things that he has to do, and Goth being sort of hide because it's consistent with the society, and Goth being forced to do certain things because that's how you do things in this place, and you live by that, but that means you're also sort of scuppered by it as well. And I like that Barusa, who is neither a goodie nor a baddie, sort of says to Goth, he rather loftily says, it's by their actions that they are judged. It's Everybody has very believable interactions, and their motivations are consistent with their character, rather than people being goody or baddie or one note. I think it's so it's the intelligence of it, the deftness of it. I mean, he makes it look easy, Robert Holmes, and he has immense skill, I think, as a writer. I love this. I think it's gorgeous. I think it's brilliant. And so I think for part two, the thing that maybe encapsulates most of what I've been talking about is kind of Gallifrey. It's the way that Gallifrey is depicted through its conception of this, scholastic monastic sort of legislative, a place of, statutes. There's the whiff. Even though I know there's a court scene, but there's a whiff of the bar about the whole place, and the fact that has been, the conception of it from Holmes to sort of try and rationalize it with the Time Lords that we've seen before, but make it more interesting than godlike beings, and so to create a sort of cynical underbelly, as we will see, but also, what it is on the surface is of this austere, regal, legal sort of place, that is then echoed in the characters that he populates it with, who are all extremely well drawn. Often we're told about them through dialogue, but not directly, through the little things that they do and that they say. But then the way that these characters have been cast and played, and their costumes have been designed, and the fact that the designer Roger Murray Leach has responded to it, and Dudley Simpson has given it music that sort of buffers that as well. So I think I'm going to say, yeah, it's that whole feel and conception and depiction of Gallifrey, which just to me is 100% successful, even though there's the odd joke that's a bit on the nose, and again, even though I can completely see why the people who are annoyed with this reframing of the Time Lords might have seen that as almost blasphemous, but I think it's an artistic decision that enables us to gain more than we lose, and it makes the Time Lords really interesting figures, and I think gives them legs in a way that if they were just boring gods, they would not. I don't think they're done as well again, which is another reason to celebrate how they're done here. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a golden age of Doctor Who, and I think this is beautiful, beautiful stuff. Even though my taste is more for, stories set on Earth and in history, and Gallifrey isn't like, even though it has these echoes of different things, he's cherry picked things from our history and from our vocabulary and from our iconography and all of that, to create something that feels whole and very much of its own. It's not like, putting people, even though Spandrel says miles away, but it's not like plucking people from now and sticking them in an alien environment and making us understand them in that way. We understand them on their own terms. They are an intelligent creation that are bound by their own rules. They've not had to cheapen it by going, oh look, they're just like you because they do this, that, and the other. Although that Time Lord has his hip and all of that, that is all within a much more interesting and bespoke creation that we understand, even though it's not had to come to us too far. I just think it's great. I should think, I don't know, I'm not confident about this, but I'm not. Yeah, it's always sad when I start well because I get hopeful, and it's the hope that kills you, isn't it? So what's Daren going to choose for episode 2?
My second favourite thing, episode 2, broadly speaking, I want to talk about casting. Specifically, at first, really, the Master, and how they handled the Master, because it was relatively unique. Hard to imagine now, because you look back, and I think a lot of fans are probably familiar with the way he looks in this, and indeed it was something that was picked up to some degree, I feel, to lesser effect and lesser performance in The Keeper of Traken, personally. I think this was definitive. But the idea of the emaciated Master, we never quite know. Even now, we don't know why he was so burnt up and horrifically looking with this sort of macabre, starey grimace of a face. And that was coupled brilliantly by not only the sort of the bitterness and desperation and pain that he seemed to have underneath the surface, and this mad sort of attempt to sort of regain some sort of control and revenge. Roger Delgado's Master was always charming. He would smile as he stabbed you. This was a Master who was just so driven to cause havoc, chaos, and death, and was just creepy in the extreme. And yeah, absolutely horrified me as a child. Just something that stayed with me. But Peter Pratt, absolutely superb. And he's very much, I think, what he created there with that version of the Master was much more of a Doctor Who monster than just bringing back the Master. It was a very different sort of look. Other casting things, it was nice to see Planet of Evil's Shinsky and Pyramids of Mars, and I mean Peter Maycock as one of the guards. That was a fun little moment. Obviously, great to see Bernard Horsfall back. You know, he was in the War Games, wasn't he? Also playing a Time Lord, I think he was. Yeah, and of course he was Gulliver in The Mind Robber. So fabulous actor. The casting throughout this is superb. The wonderful Eric Chitty as the beloved, befuddled Engin. Bye bye, Engin. He's very old, befuddled old man. He's wonderful, and he is great with George Pravda's Catalan Scoundrel. They're kind of like a wonderful odd couple, and indeed kind of set of companions for the Doctor in the story. The most unusual companions probably the Doctor's ever had, bar Wilf. Just wonderful. Yeah, it works so well, and it's really interesting. And then of course you've got people like Angus MacKay as Barusa, and his witty put downs, certainly at the climax of the story, and how he interacts with the Doctor is superb, and giving him a 9 out of 10 for his efforts. Also lovely, the obsequious Runcible, played by Hugh Walters, of course, is equally effective and brilliant. The casting throughout, just really, really well cast and brilliant story. And I think, second to none.
Yeah, the casting is brilliant. I mean, I think Daren kind of had two things there, because the depiction of the Master is one, although that depiction includes the actor who has been cast, Peter Pratt, and the casting as a whole. And it's I always try and hold back from choosing casting or actors, because I love the actors in Doctor Who and I love the casting in Doctor Who, and I'd probably choose the cast most of the time of things, because even when a cast it doesn't 100% work, I still find it interesting and reflective of a time that is full of people and performances that fascinate me, and a performance style that I enjoy so much. Where nowadays we go for and there's some brilliant acting on television today, but I do like that style of acting where characters are real, but perhaps the truth doesn't have to be entirely naturalistic, because acting isn't necessarily a naturalistic process. It's sometimes about it's they say it's holding a mirror up, don't they? But a mirror actually doesn't show you the correct image, and because you're translating and you're conveying and you're communicating character and soul and truth, and you don't necessarily have to do that by whispering and mumbling. Is basically what I'm saying, and the truth can be, housed in a very vividly painted box. Haha. But I don't think there's a duff performance in The Deadly Assassin. I think everyone is marvellous. We haven't seen Peter Maycock yet. He pops up next week as the guard solist. But yes, you're right. He's in Pyramids of Mars as Ibrahim Namin, and he's excellent in that as well. I don't think he gets a lot to do in. I say as well. It's nice to see him in Deadly Assassin, but he hardly does anything. And yes, Eric Chitty, excitonic circuitry. He's so wonderful. A member of the Society of Genealogists, Eric Chitty. What a beautiful, lovely actor. The precision of Angus Mackay. Bernard Horsfall was indeed a Time Lord in the War Games, so we do have an element of continuity there, which I rather like. I mean, the fact is that David Maloney cast him in everything, so he's also Gulliver, and he's Tauron, of course, in Planet of the Daleks. So is it so much that he's going, oh yeah, I should have continuity between my Time Lords, or is it is Bernard Horsfall available? Well, if he is, I'm putting him in because I put him in everything. I mean, Horsfall's in 4 Doctor Who's, and Maloney cast him in all of them. And he's excellent, and you can see why. He's a fine actor. And I've hardly mentioned him, and I think, again, that's probably because I just take him for granted. The Master is interesting, though, because I think Peter Pratt is great, and I did talk about how I think it's a perfectly acceptable reframing of the character to go, this person who wants to take over the universe and has a grudge against the Doctor could distill that all into just, utter dogged, fixated cruelty of a desperate man who's, as he says, he's kept alive by hate. So he's a pure distillation of sort of revenge and death. And the fact, therefore, that you have that stunning visual of the cowled figure, which is a brilliant design, and the fact that the mouth doesn't move brilliantly is combated by the fact that the tremulous voice beneath has intense power and exudes hatred and almost psychopaths, it's a sort of psychopathic hatred, but also that sort of zombie-like element. And I think Peter Pratt is very good. I think the costume is very good. I accept the reframing of the character, even though I love Roger Delgado so much. And I think the way that the Master is introduced in here has a surprising sort of lack of a sense of occasion. Now, partially you could go, well, because they're being braver than that. They're going, no, this story has got to grip you, not that thing that a lot of modern television does, is go, oh, look, it's that thing from an old episode, so now you've all got to get excited, which is which is a sort of cheat, isn't it? So you could say that they're going, well, no, we're not gonna. Just the fact that we're using an old enemy isn't going to mean we're going to use that for we're going to cheat an episode ending with that or anything like that. We've got the story has got to earn that. So in a way, you can sort of read that as quite brave. But I do think I am surprised at how sort of underwhelmingly the Master is sort of just pops up in it, and also just as a matter of personal taste, even though I think Peter Pratt does nothing wrong and is good, and the design is excellent, and as I say, I understand how they've developed the character into what he is in this, and they don't explain it, and please God never do. I mean, I saw no need for Davros's condition to be explained. You don't have to. It's a curse of modern television where they go, that thing that's slightly mysterious, we're going to tell you what it is and how it works, which to me is contrary to what you should do. Let the audience, let me on your imaginary forces work. Let the imagination do some of it, because then it becomes a richer experience. And I love the fact that they're brave enough to go, well, look, he's obviously been up to no good, and it's reduced him to this, and Time Lords can regenerate and change, so why wouldn't they sort of cling on, why wouldn't they as they not die, kept alive again by pure hatred? It's a bit of an Omega thing, isn't it, as well, being kept alive by your sort of will as your body sort of decays and crumbles, which then gives us license to have a walking cadaver, a zombie-like dead man. So it all works within the fiction, within the conception of the character, and within what the story requires, which is a monster in a story actually about revenge of one person upon another. So it's brilliantly conceived and very, very well wrought. But actually, for me, it's one of the, when I think about The Deadly Assassin, it's one of my least interesting things. I don't think I would ever have chosen, even though, I definitely would have chosen the cast had I, been able to choose everything before Daren. That's part of the game. I have to try and anticipate what people are going to choose and when, in order to prosper. And sometimes I kick myself and go, oh, I was going to choose that, but I was going to wait till next episode. Or, oh, yeah, I've chosen a thing this episode that I'm not happy with. And of course I should have chosen that. Why didn't I think of that? I lost sight of it because I was talking and because, I stopped watching the episode 25 minutes ago and I've already forgotten what I was talking about when I was watching it, because I have to keep talking, because I have to fill silences, because that's what broadcasting is, especially when there's only one of you. You sometimes don't have time to think and formulate, and you forget bits that seem then just so obvious when the person says it. But I have to say, I will put my head in the executioner's block with this episode, where I've conceded a point. I go, I wouldn't have chosen the Master. Not that I think there's anything wrong with it, though, as I say, I can see people who might object, and certainly would have objected at the time to what has happened to the character and the unceremonious way with which that has been done. I love that visual. I like that performance. It really works within the context of the story. But there is so much else that I like, often made of humbler ingredients. It's easy to make an impact with a scary costume and lots of monstrousness. The fact that the human characters are so deftly done, and the action sequences and the politicking of it and the conception of the planet are in a way more interesting than the thing that the Doctor Who always has, which is the sort of monster, the villain, which is so in a way the easiest things to make an impact with. So it's not to take away from the quality of what that master looks like, sounds like, and does. It's more that everything around him that has no right to be as good as it has, in a way, because it's harder to do, is so good that actually I sort of take him in my stride a little bit. So whilst I accept Daren's choice and think it's a fine choice, I also have to be honest and go, well, that's okay. I'll take that on the chin, because I never would have chosen that myself. Because this is a story that just has so much to it that I think is fabulous. I could go on. Look, I'm looking at my counter on my audio recording. I've talked for an hour. The episode's 25 minutes long, so that's 35 minutes. I've talked for longer when the episode's not on than I have for when the episode was on. I mean, that is also a damning indictment of my motor mouth, and I'm sure there are plenty of thoughts and sentences that ended up going to nowhere. But nonetheless, I love the fact that Doctor Who gives me so much to enthuse about. That's what it's about, isn't it? That's what this is. That's what this is about. Watching Doctor Who and rediscovering things, or just re-experiencing things that I really love, and having an absolute ball doing so, and being able to communicate that to you people who are kind enough to listen for whatever reason you've decided to give your valuable time to my outpourings. So I hope that it's an enthusiasm that puts a smile on your face and a spring in your step, because good creativity, good endeavour, thrilling storytelling, excellent creativity, people at the top of their game, making something that has lasted and endured and thrilled and entertained and diverted is it's immeasurable. You can't put a price on it, because that's not what entertainment is it? Entertainment is impossible to calculate, because it's so trivial and unimportant, and yet without it we'd be dead. So hurrah for that. And now next week, there's an episode that caused a stir at the time, and I think will continue so to do. There's nothing quite like The Deadly Assassin Part 3, but I wonder if there'll be much to talk about beyond going, oh look, there's another visual, because the plot does kind of stop a little bit. But is that a good thing or a bad thing? We shall have to find out when we spend most of next week in the Matrix on Gallifrey. But until then, thank you so much for listening. And my day has been better because of Doctor Who today, and I hope yours has too. Happy times and places to you all. Thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest watching The Deadly Assassin is Daren Thomas. I'm grateful to Daren and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible. And they include Keith Say, Graham Slate, David Shepherdson, Stephen, Neil Tate, Nick Temple, Damien Timmer, Sabrina Tirabassi, Apollo C. Vermouth, Gary Wales, Adam Westwood, Stephen White, Tom White, Michael Williams, Rhys Williams, Andrew Willis, Andrew Wilson, David James Wilson, Sydney Wilson, Nick Tedston, Neil Tate, Richard Straw, Stephen Moffat, Gavin McLean, Christopher Meredith, Rob Leonard, Ronald Hayden, Peter Harness, James Curray Smith, Peter Burns, and Ruben Herfindahl. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like your name to be read out on the credits, that is one of the bonuses of being a patron of Toby Hadoke's time travels and various other bits of my output. That's at patreon.com. No. Yeah, at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. How many times have I said this? Oh dear, I'm falling apart like the Time Lord played by John Dawson. I'm falling apart. Yeah. What? Hello. Oh, I'm having a bit of trouble with my hip. I do have a little bit of. I do have a recurring injury that I sustained during a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Yes, not in the war. From jumping off the back of a van in a comedy way, not bending my legs as I landed because I thought that looked funny. And now I do have a recurring. Anyway, you don't need to know that. You don't have to pay my medical bills because I don't have need to. So, but you can sponsor my artistry by going to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, which is a place that you can get your name registered to be read on the credits, and also, more importantly, you get all of my audio output early, a few months early in the case of Happy Times and Places, and certainly a couple of episodes in advance, generally, of Too Much Information and Far Too Much Information. Too Much Information and Indefinable Magic, and Far Too Much Information is an exclusive podcast for patrons only. I've also started putting out interviews with Doctor Who people that I've done, some released before, some unreleased, and some released before but not in full with extra context and extra content. There's also brief looks behind the scenes at some of the Blu-ray and DVD extras that I do, and lots of other bits and bobs. There's quite a lot there. There's usually 3 releases a week. Plenty of it. So if it's 3 podcasts, that's 3 hours worth of material. There's monthly AMAs, sometimes more than one of those a month, and they're an hour long too generally. So you get a lot of bang for not much buck, because the tiers start at £3 per month. They go up to whatever you want to pay. It's a beautiful system like that. But everything is available content-wise at the lowest tier, and you can also get a 10% discount if you sign up for a year in one go. So that's patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. You can do one-off contributions if that's what you'd prefer, which are equally appreciated at kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. And if you can do neither, I totally understand. Times are tough, and I'm grateful to you just for listening. But what costs you nothing is a little bit of your time to go to the various outlets that you find these on, and to give them a 5-star rating, to like and subscribe, and perhaps to write a few lines of appreciation, which will direct more people the way of these. If you like them, other like-minded people would be too. Word of mouth's good as well. And if you could go to YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube channel, where these have started to be distributed, they just upload automatically now, just with a placeholder logo. That would help too, because I'm trying to be better at that. I am, of course, on all the social media outlets. Twitter at Hadoke Podcasts, and also at Toby Hadoke, Instagram at Toby.Hadoke, and I have a Facebook page as well. So, you can't avoid me. It's almost like I'm stalking you, but it's your own fault. It's your own fault. You lured me into your orbit, and now you just cannot. Wherever you turn, I will be. It's like a virtua castrovalva. Wherever you go, you end up at me if you're not careful. But any support and following and all of that there would be much appreciated. Thanks. Gosh, that was a long one, wasn't it? I really enjoyed that. Hope you did too. And I just love those characters. Oh, you would now, though. You'd have kept those caricatures that Tom Baker did. John Dawson, because he's not going to be in another episode, is he? John Dawson, who's the guy who is the other Time Lord, the one that's not Michael Bilton. The one that has a bit of trouble with his hip. I'd mentioned that he was originally cast as Sims in Adam Adamant Lives, but I sort of speak of that as that's something everyone's over familiar with. But he's also, of course, he's Mr. Mumford in Rent-A-Ghost as well, John Dawson. He has a couple of sort of telefantasies, not a word people use anymore, but sort of claims popular culture of the avant-garde claims to fame. But yeah, he was one of those actors that did so much, and I think he's really good considering he's playing unnamed Time Lord. I think it's actually a really lovely performance, and yeah, I needed to point out his Rent-A-Ghost, because it's probably more likely to be spottable for that than for Adam Adamant Lives, which he wasn't in. Well, he was in it. He turns up later, doesn't he, as a minister in an episode, but he was originally cast as Sims, the part played by Jack May, General Hermack, and also Nelson Gabriel in The Archers. We are going to be too late again. But anyway, that's how I've gone from John Dawson to Jack May. I'm now doing impressions of Jack May, who's nowhere near the deadly assassin. But that's because this is a rambling load of old nonsense. But nonetheless, 'tis mine own.